there are people joining in. That's good. Welcome, everybody. I'm Renaldo McKenzie. I am a PhD student here in the Africology and African American Studies Department. I'm also the author of Neoliberalism, Globalization, Income Inequality, Poverty, and Resistance. And a book that looks at how structural adjustment has disproportionately affected people of the global south. Now, today we're not talking about that. Today we're talking about the impact of the U.S. elections have on African Americans. And of course, yesterday we had an election, and today, and we know that a Southeast Asian woman Southeast Asian African woman ran. That's how she identifies, and she lost yesterday. And people are slowly coming in. And, many of us woke up. I went out to work this morning. Some people were very sad because they said that they're affected by the elections. They're emotionally affected by it. But we are not just talking about this one election. We're talking about the history of this country. What has been the progress? What has been progress, and so on. So we want to start by what has been the impact of U.S. elections on African Americans? The question is important and suggests a problem that requires redress, which is supplied by the question: elections? The location is the United States of America. That is a multicultural society based on constitutional rights and freedoms, democracy, and on the ideal that all men are free and therefore has equal opportunity. However, it is also a place that is the hallmark and zenith of white supremacy, European domination and invention that embraces the ideals that put African Americans at odds with themselves and their achievements. African Americans have a genesis in these U.S. that involved a violent dehumanization of people who for years have endured enslavement. Through successive efforts, with the help of white Christians and politicians, they were able to obtain some humanity and equality, but at the expense of supplanting their hopes, dreams, and cultural identity, while still trapped at the bottom within a racialized society based on capitalist class system. Since 1776 and the elections that ensued, African Americans have slowly garnered certain freedoms through persecution, martyrdom, and internal strife. Today, or yesterday, a woman who identifies as African American and South Asian is VP and running for president. Of course, she lost. Now, but however, the question still remains, is that progress, or is this progress within the mindset of African Americans? Is that progress? That's a question. How does it provide an opportunity for even greater change towards developing more African institutions and restoring African culture and history, changing language, and raising Africa to the level of Greece and Europe? Would this create agency among African Americans to better their lives? Is that a fair question? Now, the true question is, as Africologists, some of us are Africologists, but as Africologists or within the Africology department or as academics, should we even ask the question about elections as the true answer? As the true answer is within the consciousness of the African himself or herself. So the question, some people may say, oh, it's a wrong question. Which requires the answer is from within the African himself, which requires the building of agency. I just learned, I've always know about the word agency, but agency within Africology is kind of interesting. Agency that is only developed within an African center, that is achieved through policy, focus again on the restoration of Africa as the starting point. Now, is there a political will to do so? Is there a political will to do so? Think about it, to do what we just mentioned. To rewrite history, to begin within the U.S. Is there political will to do so within the U.S. to rewrite history? To begin to instill a consciousness within Africans to start working in concert for change or towards change? We're almost getting ready to ask the questions. But let's begin with the thinking. Many African Americans we spoke to, and we actually did over the past 2 weeks, getting ready for this interview, the questions I'm asked, if I do ask questions, they come from people we ask, not from me. Okay, so we went around and asked people questions. So many African Americans whom we spoke to, and some of my whom we asked about the impact, stated that African Americans are being used to secure an unfair power base of white rich men. That's what they say on the streets. Yes, in the trenches, that's what they say. Some respondents stated that if they do lead African Americans, they are only puppets. They're only puppets, like, and they mentioned Miss Kamala Harris as a puppet, puppets of the wealthy. They continue the same policy that has not helped African Americans. During Trump, African Americans were gunned down without any support from the president. Many feel that Obama was a fiscal conservative, but refused to highlight any policy to advance African Americans, who continue to ravage from unfair healthcare regime and the economic crisis from Bush. So as we get ready to ask these questions, the question is: have civil rights and voting rights, DEI, affirmative action, sentencing reform? We have somebody here he's not here, he left. Oh wow, talking about restorative justice and so on and so forth. Are these black studies and loans, and are these enough to say that African Americans have benefited or impacted from US elections? In places where African Americans live, there are still this de jure and de facto rates of discrimination with high levels of crime and violence, poverty and lack of investment with heavy dependence on social welfare and aid. What has been the policy and effectiveness of elected officials to address these, and what does the data suggest? I don't know if you guys can help me with this. And we also mentioned, we already said that the electoral process fails because they fail to provide adequate representation. That's according to Lanier Gunair, not me. Is that a fair criticism, or is it another discriminatory tactic? And is there any truth to it? What specific policies have there been to uplift African Americans economically, given the history of discrimination? What about the removal of affirmative action? And the attempts to ban critical race theory or black books? Sorry, African American literature. How does the political system that we find ourselves, how does it countervail? Because we can't have this discussion without thinking about the system or the context. Again, I started by saying the place is the United States, and I talked about it. Not Africa, we're in the US. So how does the political system countervail the goals and effective and the revolutionary change toward for African American? We will delve into this today, and we have with us two panelists who will help us to explore. They are from Temple University, and they will help us to explore these issues. And of course, they are Dr. Zamir Ben Don, Dr. Zamir. Which one is Dr. Zamir? Wait, why do I have Dr. Zamir here? Dr. Zamir and Dr. Jared Clemmons. Oh, that's Zamir. All right. I love that. Okay, that's all right. Just Zamir and Jared is fine. All right, that's the American way, postmodernist way to say just your first name, right? I'm just kidding. But Dr. Zamir joined the Temple Law faculty in the fall of 2022 as an assistant professor. His research interests and emerging scholarship lies in the intersection of criminal law, race and the law, and American history. I'm happy that you are here because criminality is a very important issue, and I work in criminal justice as one of my 10 jobs that I have. Now, after graduating law school, Zamir joined the Legal Aid Society in New York City as a staff attorney in Bronx. Over the next 4 years, he represented hundreds of clients on both felony and misdemeanor matters, and he won most of his trials. In 2017, he was founding member of Black Attorneys to Legal Aid Caucus, an amalgamation of over 100 black legal aid lawyers and advocates for racial justice, both within and without the Legal Aid Society. He served in Bala leadership for nearly 5 years, and in 2019, he joined the Community Justice Unit, where he provided wrap-around legal services to participants in non-profit organizations that do cure violence work. Wow, I didn't realize that you have wrap-around service as it relates to the legal services, wrap-around services. That's a case management term. Now, Dr. Jared Clemmons, Jared Clemmons is Clemmons sounds like an athlete, yes? but Jared is an assistant professor of political science at Temple University. His research focuses on political economy, race and racism, political behavior, the politics of education and American political development. His work has been published in academic journals such as American Political Science Review, Perspective on Politics, Political Science and Politics, Sociology, Race, Ethnicity, and he has also been featured in public outlets such as the New York Times, the American Politics and Policy blog, published by London School of Economics, the Washington Post, so on and so forth. He's currently working on a book project entitled Privatizing Anti-Racism. Wow, I want to know about that, but not now. But privatizing anti-racism. Why education cannot solve racial inequality, which traces the political origins of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, so on and so forth. But wow, this is quite interesting that you are doing a study that looks at that. So they are here with us, and they are going to provide us with some of the help to distill and to answer some of the questions we have. Welcome, Jared, and welcome, Zamir.
Yeah.
All right. Now, we'll kick things off by inviting, let's ask, who wants to go first? Zamir or Jared? Let's start with Zamir, Zamir, you go first. Introduce yourself. I mean, is there anything I leave out or anything you want to say quickly about what's going on with the elections and how it impacts African Americans?
That's a broad question. Hi, hope everybody's doing okay. Part of my struggle with this question is the fact that Black people are not a monolith. And so there were Black people that voted for Kamala Harris, there were Black people that voted for Donald Trump, and there were Black people that voted third party. For me, in terms of my own personal perspective, and I know it's a question that we're going to get to, but I think that presidential elections have largely disserved Black people, but I think electoral processes across the board at all levels of government have largely disserved Black people. And this country has been headed in a certain direction since the 1970s, where there is an effort to stamp out any effort to address racism in this country. And there has been an effort to make the rich richer and the poor poorer. And that trajectory has been in place regardless of who has occupied the White House. It has been in place through Democratic presidents, and it has been in place through Republican presidents. And so for me personally, I am unsurprised completely by the election result. And I'm also, I don't want to say I'm bothered, but there is this, I guess, for me, this attempt to put Donald Trump on this pedestal of wickedness. And when I look at, again, where the country has been headed for the past 50 years, and when I look at the discourse that comes around every election cycle, both from the candidates and from the conversation about why we should go out and vote, and the conversation about, well, we need to pick the lesser of two evils, that is the same recycled stuff over and over again. And we all know that insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. And yet somehow, some way, millions of Americans, and Black people in particular, will march to the polls and vote and think that marching to the polls and voting and doing nothing else is going to change the situation that Black people are dealing with. And it's not. 50 years plus should have proven that, but at least so far it hasn't. So I think when it comes to having conversations about politics, that we need to be real with ourselves in terms of what has participation in the electoral process gotten us, if it's something that we should continue to engage in. If we are going to engage in it, what else are we going to do? Because simply engaging in it by itself is not going to accomplish anything. And I think we need to be real in terms of what exactly it is that we're calling progress, and how exactly are we defining progress. Does progress mean that we have Black faces in high places, or does progress mean that as African Americans, as a group, that we are making advances in the society? Because if we're defining it in the former, then we're making a whole lot of progress. If we're defining it as the latter, then we have a lot of very uncomfortable conversations to have. And I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. There's much to ask. There's much to ask, and we make a point. What we have also Jared. Jared, introduce yourself and take a bite at the question, if you will. Yes.
So first, it's a pleasure to be here. Really look forward to your questions when we have the Q&A. So I'm going to take a slightly different approach. So I teach African American political thought as well as the Intro to Political Philosophy class here at Temple. So I actually have one of my students here. I think Chloe is. Yeah, so Chloe knows. So one of the things that I do in my political philosophy class is we spend about 3 weeks of the semester discussing a very seemingly simple question, but one that I think is not actually very simple to answer, and it's pretty much been the question that's animated American politics since its inception, which is, what is freedom? And the reason I think we should be a little bit more thoughtful about the way we ask that question is because freedom doesn't look the same for everyone. And so what I've tried to impress upon my students in that class and just get people to think about is, when we say we're fighting for freedom, and incidentally, that was kind of Kamala's catchphrase, was, if you remember, she used Freedom by Beyonce as kind of the anchor of her campaign. And the whole time I would hear her, I would think to myself, what does this mean exactly? And so I think part of the issue in America is that we have internalized a very specific form of freedom, idea of freedom, which is typically called Republican freedom. This idea in which people should have property, the individual should be paramount, and that really that government should essentially only be there to maintain some semblance of order, and anything beyond that is kind of beyond the fray. Now, that was an idea of freedom that was established at a very particular point in American history where we didn't have globalized capitalism. So hopefully throughout the discussion today, we'll start to think about how do we think about capitalism, not just to be anti-capitalism, but to actually historicize it and think about, what was the kind of task of political development in the early settlement period. Obviously, that was also intertwined with racial slavery, settler colonialism, lots of things that we know very well. But I think if we don't kind of take that more meta view and kind of ask, what are we fighting for? If we are fighting for freedom, I think we're going to keep spinning our wheels. And so I think what we should try to do today is have a slightly more philosophical conversation, if people are willing to do that today. So I'll stop there.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that you talk about what freedom looks like, while you talk about as a group. Now, I mean, we live in a society, people are now talking about Afropolitanism. Who was that? Sarah Balakrishna talk about Afropolitanism, and Homi Bhabha talks about cosmopolitanism, and so on and so forth. How can we achieve what we want to achieve as African Americans, as a group, within a society that is becoming neoliberally globalized, one, and two, and when we talk about freedom and have the idea of freedom, there is a political divide in this country between Republicans and Democrats. How can we shift through, navigate the political divide of being labeled a Democrat or a Republican, a Libertarian or a Green Party? How can we achieve this kind of freedom given the political divide that we find ourselves?
So,
and how do we define freedom when we have politics at play?
Yeah, so I think first off, in political science, it's probably heretical for me to say this, but we kind of think of partisanship. So whether you identify as Democrat or Republican is kind of the story, but I wanted to share it. I'm a political scientist, so we like numbers and data. So I looked at some exit polls before I came here today. So these are some important statistics. Number one, Trump improved on his 2020 margin in 2,367 counties. Yeah. He only did worse this election cycle in 240 counties, or I'm from Louisiana, so parishes. So counties are parishes.
Yeah.
So pretty much I don't know the percentage off the top of my head, but that's at least 90% of American counties. Trump did better than he did. Keep in mind, there are a number of counties where it's predominantly Latinx, it's not just white, so we can't just chalk it all up to white people doing this. Although I'm not saying that we don't want to have that conversation, but I think that should push us to think a little bit more. Second, Trump did better pretty much with every possible demographic cross-section you could possibly imagine. Mm-hmm. You take into account gender, you take into account income, you take into account education, you take into account race, literally all of them. So what that suggests to me is that there has to be something more deep-seated with the way that people understand what the idea of America is supposed to represent. So one thing I think we run into the issue of doing is talking about America like it's a thing. I always tell my students, America isn't a thing. America is an idea. So like the question is, what idea do we have of America? And that's a question that I don't know that people have the appetite to answer, or maybe it's just so taken for granted that people don't feel like it needs to be had. But I think that these are, again, more fundamental. Again, I want us to kind of think about some of these like philosophical questions. And so the last thing I'll say is that the top 3 most important issues, according to, this is the CNN exit poll. So the economy was number 1. Now, what do people mean when they say the economy? Cost of living, inflation, it's kind of high, kind of a very general term, but that was number 1. Shortly, right after that was immigration. And I really think you can kind of bundle the immigration and the economy together. The second issue was saving democracy, or democracy. But if you look among the people who listed democracy as the second most concerning thing, the candidates were evenly split. So half of the electorate said Trump was the problem with democracy, and half of the electorate said Kamala was the problem with democracy. So I think that begs another set of more investigation. And then the last issue was the abortion issue. But I wanted to say that I think we don't interpret the abortion issue right. It's not, if you look at so they actually broke out the abortion question by like, what do you think would be a fair, like, permissible abortion law? And like, essentially, there wasn't this vast agreement that people should be able to have kind of abortions, no questions asked. Like, most Americans are more ambivalent about like, to what degree are they okay with like giving like complete freedom in that domain. And so, hopefully, these are some issues that we can kind of use as a launching point to discuss.
Probably I have some questions. That is interesting. You talk about the economy, inflation, immigration, democracy, abortion. Are those issues are these issues important to African Americans politically today? Would it bring about the change that we're looking for, that Pan-African change and better economically? By the way, we talk about economy. There's also the issue of relative deprivation. Relative deprivation says that society, wherever you have high levels of crime and violence, you have high levels of income inequality and poverty. That seems to define certain black and brown communities. That is, of course, that's a relativist theory, but that's also part of the issue. And I asked earlier, where the political will to change the lives of others? But I'm asking you, Dr. Sir Zamir, the economy, inflation, immigration, democracy, abortion, are these African American issues? And how historically has U.S. elections, how has that helped African Americans?
Okay, that's 2 questions. So.
Well, yeah, I know it's 2 questions. Yes, but fine. Are these issues African American issues? And has the U.S. and then I'll follow up with has the U.S. elections provided answers to these?
Okay, are they
historically? Yeah,
there are issues that impact African Americans.
Okay.
There are issues that impact.
Let's talk about abortion. The issue of abortion is that, and making it legal or illegal. Is that what? What about that? Is that an issue, an African American issue?
That impacts African Americans. So Black people are affected by it, yes.
Okay.
And are affected by all of the other issues you raised as well. In terms of where they stand, again, Black people are not a monolith, so it ranges. But there are issues that impact Black people, no question.
Yes. You have a comment from the group. Yes, you said you agreed with him.
I didn't say anything.
Okay. Anybody have any comment? Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm about to respond to.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with you that of course it's not even about agreement. It's about what's obvious that Trump did better in this election than the previous exercise. And now, please, I know how to vote. I'm an international student here, so my perspective is from the outside. And as an African from the continent, the lesson that I'm taking back home to people in Africa is this: that American voters and America is not ready for a woman president. It's not ready for a woman as president. That's what I'll be reporting back to my people at home. Yes. And why am I saying that? This guy, in fact, I will say that the real winner of the election is that woman. She won. She made history because she has 2 problems. As a minority, she's a woman, And secondly, she's a Asian black, a double minority. It's a case of David versus Goliath. And it's contesting against a rich white man. A rich white man and a Protestant. So that is the real issue. And in the first instance, in the first showing of Trump in 2020, he competed against a woman. Yes, and the woman was even a full white woman, and he won. The second time, he's competing against a woman, and he's winning. There is something that is telling me that if he had been if not for the fact that Joe Biden is kind of sick or something, he's very weak, Joe would have beaten him the second time. Yes, that's the lesson I'm taking back home. This guy is only strong against women.
Thank you.
Wow, interesting. And this is interesting. Comment. I know we're talking about the how the U.S. elections impact African Americans, and but I know you're talking about the issue of women and men. But of course, I mean, we talk about mother of the gods and father of the gods. Yes, of course, when we study African history, of course, women were leading and men were leading. Okay, there's no difference. But in this culture, it's different. But any comments to what the gentleman say?
Yeah, I definitely think that her gender has some, for sure, like for a let's say, negligible amount of the population that it would matter. But I guess I tend to think of like patriarchy, I think sometimes people think of it strictly attitudinally, and I don't think that that's the right way to go about it. So like, what do I think about when I think about patriarchy? So like, to me, if we say patriarchy is a social construct, what that means is we've had institutions that pretty much has codified or valued certain traits or characteristics that are generally viewed with maleness. And so lack of empathy, kind of the desire for power, this kind of wanting to impose one's strength, like that to me is what patriarchy is. So we have over centuries erected an economy and a political kind of structure in which male traits are valued and feminine traits and feminine characteristics are systematically undervalued. And so I think the way that we should think about patriarchy is that in this respect, like Trump represents a lot of the things that we as a society have collectively decided to value, which is this willingness, this desire for wealth and power and like the ability to kind of bend other people to your will. Like that, we have all, like to some degree, collectively internalized that. Now, the way that we express that is going to look different depending on a whole sort of things. Like we can, perhaps be more aware of it and like adjust our behavior accordingly. But like ultimately, we do live in a patriarchal society, and I definitely would say that for sure that factors into it. But I would also say that Kamala as a candidate didn't necessarily do herself any favor either, especially when you look at, what it is that Americans of all stripes have been saying that they were most concerned about, whether that was the inflation or whether that was their job prospects or whatever the case is. There isn't anything really explicit that the campaign attempted to address in that regard. Now, I do, in some respects, feel somewhat sympathetic for the position that Kamala was in the sense that Trump strategically framed her as the incumbent candidate, and she really couldn't back out of that because, in some respects, she couldn't distance herself from Biden too much because she was essentially running on this idea Biden represented a break from Trump and was better in that regard. So it seems somewhat hypocritical for her to be like, oh, well, we're going to dismiss what Biden has done, even though the electorate was expressing that they were not necessarily overly excited with the prospect of another Biden term. And I'm not really sure that Biden would have beaten Trump. If you look at a lot of the polling in like June, I mean, he had almost a 20-point margin on Biden. So Biden as a candidate, I think, we forget that Biden was supposed to serve a function, which is when he ran, he said he was going to be a transitional figure, i.e. he was not going to run for re-election. So I was a little flabbergasted when the media just conveniently forgot that until like May. And then when he has his awful debate performance, I was like, yeah, well, we knew that. We knew that he was going to be 82 when he ran for re-election, and that he himself said that he was just going to pass the baton. So like for Kamala, like she really only had 3 months essentially to kind of forge a separate identity out of the Biden situation. Now, I don't know how else what else she could have done. The fact that she actually got 234, whatever electoral votes she got, to me was actually more surprising, because if you read the writing was on the wall that the country was not behind Kamala, or really Biden either, or the Democratic Party. So I think it was a little bit more systemic than just people didn't want her before she was.
I'm going to follow up that and have Dr. Zamir come in here, but I wanted to say, I mean, I always say we don't get involved in hypotheticals. I don't know, but I'm just messing with you. But we don't know what would have happened. I mean, but although we may know, I don't know. But what we do know is that Kamala lost last night. I have a question. Do you feel, Dr. Zamir, that do you feel that Trump is a better candidate than Kamala in advancing African American agency and issues? And in fact, let me follow that. That's question 2, looking at the issue of the progress or symbolism. With Kamala Harris, an African American and South Asian woman, serving as president or vice president, is this symbolic process, or does it signal genuine political and social advancement for African Americans? So, what do you have to say about that?
Okay. No, Trump is not a better candidate for serving the issues of black people. That's all I have to say on that. With regards to Kamala and her appearance, I tend to study history. I like history. I think history is important. And back during chattel slavery times, they had field Negroes and house Negroes. They had black people who worked in the fields and black people who worked in the houses. And black people who worked in the houses generally had slightly better privilege and perks than those who worked in the field, and they worked to protect that. And so if working to protect that meant disassociating yourself from black issues and disassociating yourself from your fellow black people, then that's normally what happened. And the slave master used black people in chattel slavery times to divide and to conquer. And so you elevate certain African Americans or certain black people and use them in essence as weapons against the struggle. And I think generally speaking, when it comes to black people in politics in this country particularly, that's largely the function that African Americans have served. Black people who get into politics, first off, get into politics through funding, corporate funding, which means that you're being backed by others. You need proper media attention, which means that you need to be featured by media companies who are owned by white people. And then you need the backing 99 out of 100% of the time from established political parties who are controlled by white people. So you're getting into these positions with rich white support. How can anyone expect you to then support or speak on behalf of poor and working class black people and people of color? It doesn't happen. Practically speaking, that's not how political systems work in this country. It's never been how politics has worked in this country. And so when you get black people who are in high political positions, they're not going to speak to the issues that relate to black people. They're just black faces in high places. And that's not to say that there isn't a benefit to that to some degree. Certainly there's a symbolic benefit to it in terms of imaging. But in terms of substantive change, I have not really seen it. And so when it comes to progress, in my view, progress has generally come from grassroots struggle and protest at the ground level. And I don't want to hammer Kamala Harris and say that she's somehow worse than anybody else. I think it's just more of the same. That's what you get when you get black politicians. Speaking to the question that was asked about, or the comment that was made about Kamala Harris losing because she was a woman, I don't think it can be seriously debated that there were people who did not vote for her because she was a woman. Just like I don't think it can be seriously debated that people did not vote for her because she wasn't white. In the United States of America, that's what happened. But as my co-panelist noted, I think her own candidacy was not one that really excited a lot of people. Over time, people have become disillusioned with the electoral process because it has not produced the type of changes that it needs to produce. And he mentioned economics. I think one of the biggest issues that turned a lot of left-leaning voters off of voting at all was what's happening in Israel right now, with that whole crisis and the fact that you don't see any difference between what the Republicans are going to do and what the Democrats are going to do in a situation where people are being slaughtered at a whim with tax dollars that are coming from here. And so in terms of, what does it symbolize? like I said, the symbolism is good. In terms of substantive progress, it depends on how we're defining progress. If progress means that we have more black people in high places, then yes, we are making lots of progress. If it means an uplifting of our situation economically, socially, and the like, I don't know. I can't call that progress personally, but that's just me.
No, you have to say that. Okay, that was quite. Say that last piece again. You said, what does progress look like? And what if it looks like what?
I said,
So
that's
powerful.
how you're defining it. If
Okay.
you're defining it as being, getting in high places, being the first black whatever, or occupying high political positions or high business positions with not much power, then yes, a whole lot of progress has been made. But if we're talking about defining progress in terms of the betterment of the economic situation, the social situation of African Americans as a group, because as much as we promote individualism in this country, it is about group. If that's how we're defining progress, then I don't know if we can say that we've really made as much as we sometimes say we have.
Okay.
But that's just me.
I quite a few responses. Let's go with the young lady here, and then you are next. Please write down your question so you don't forget it. All right. All right. Let's go ahead.
Hi, yes, my name is Indy. I'm the first year PhD student in Africology. And so I would like to ask my question to the professor, political science professor. So, and I'm glad you brought that up, Dr. Zamir, because my issue was if they knew how other minorities other than black people, you have the Asians, you have the Hispanics, and then you have the white majority vote. If they knew how they were going to vote, why did they spend all their money chastising black people to vote? And then we turned out and everyone else was the disappointment.
Wait, who is they?
The Democratic Party, they spent all their money putting Glorilla out there, Megan Thee Stallion, to get us to vote. And then we turned out, but then every other demographic was the one who let them down. So why don't they turn their focus to chastising those groups instead of us?
So I would say a couple of things. So I do think that the way that campaigns are run now, they actually are really micro-targeted. So like anytime you use your Instagram or your TikTok or whatever, that data has been sold somewhere and campaigns are having access to it. So it's the way that campaigns operate now, it's so individualistic and it's so, this is why elections we're spending like almost $1 trillion, not maybe $1 billion. So some insane amount of money on, a lot of that is in the technology behind micro-targeting. And so now the question I think is really, what you're really getting at is, why is it that the Democratic Party is essentially haranguing black people to vote for them rather than trying to, expand their base or expand into other demographics that don't seem as inclined to vote for Democrats. I think part of that is historical. So I think the so if we think about, why do black people vote Democrat? If we remember prior to the Civil Rights Act of '64, black people, like a lot of people, actually kind of shifted between the two parties. So you had periods in which, during the FDR presidency, black people were a little bit more Democratic, but before that, they were much more Republican, or even up until, we forget, like there was a sizable portion of the black electorate that actually supported Richard Nixon in '72. Why did they support Richard Nixon? Because his program was black capitalism, and that actually appealed to a lot of black people, which is kind of what I was saying earlier, is that black people, and this is something I really try to impress upon my students in my African American political thought class, is that there has never been, in no point in American history has there been consensus among black people as to what qualifies as freedom or justice or equality or any of those things. You have some black people who believe that equal opportunity, which is kind of the pillar of liberalism, inequality as such is kind of not really the issue. The issue is making sure that black people have their slice of the capitalist pie. There's that perspective. You've had black communists, you've had black socialists, you've had black capitalists, you've had black neoconservatives. I mean, we've had different, and I think as black people, I want black people to be able to have their own kind of vision of what freedom might be, even if it's like black capitalism, which I, to put my cards on the table, I identify as socialist, so that's my politics, but I never want to impress upon people that there is some right way to do this. And I think part of having a democracy is having the ability to in some ways engage in some type of, I don't even think about the electoral portion so much, because in a lot of ways I feel like that's putting the cart before the horse. Really what we have to understand is the social component, and I think that's where we don't really have a good sense of like, what is it that people really want? Like, what are people being asked to fight for or against? I don't think that that's really clear. And I think that part of the reason that Democrats keep focusing on Black people is because even though Black people are in agreement on that, there seems to still be some degree of institutional connection to the Democratic Party in a way that it's not true for other, let's say, racial groups. So I think that's probably what's going on there.
All right, we have, no, before you wanted to say something, go ahead.
Yeah, so I got two questions, right?
Okay.
I wanted to ask you. So like, I just wanted to ask, like, do you think that education, like educating people, could like solve that problem? Like, of kind of like what you were saying too, of like, you know, people just like not knowing like who to like vote for, kind of like not like people having to be informed about that. You know what I'm saying? And then also going to, I remember you said, like we've been doing this for like 50 years, right? It's like, how could we actually like, how do you think we could like end that cycle? I feel like through history, we had times where we like really educate ourselves, and then times like where we just don't like know what to do sometimes, and it creates a divide. Like, you know, we had a civil rights movement before, I know that, right? And then like, you get us with the crack epidemic, like now people don't even know like what's going on. So like, how could we end that cycle? Like, do you think education can end that cycle, you know? So that people just know that it's one goal, we want to live comfortably, you feel me? So like that's, I would just ask that would be.
Quite powerful. I'm happy are you in the Africology department? Oh, well, okay. You should be a student here because this is a very important. P. Carnegie wrote about the miseducation of the Negro. But this is great.
Like, you know, like we all have the same goal to like live comfortably.
Yes, yes.
And like, we wouldn't have like too many arguments. I get really too many arguments about like, you know, who to vote for and all that if we just like, you know.
Oh, this department is good. But we won't let our panelists discuss, but this is good. And later on we can have a further discussion because we talk about consciousness, which requires education. But let's go with Dr. Zamir.
I want to know if you thought like education would be like.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yeah.
Define education.
Like, basically like getting rid of ignorance in the people, like telling them the truth, telling them the truth.
I mean, I think that's a baseline, yes. I mean, and the reason I say define education is because there's, I said a starting point, I didn't say the reason I said define education is because there's conventional education in terms of what you get from K through 12, which is nothing, in terms of practical knowledge of like how systems work. And then there's the education that you're just never going to get in the school system and likely in college, and you'll see that radical professors and things like that. I think having an awareness of what's going on is an absolute minimum. If you don't have that, then there's nothing else. So I mean, yes, in education in terms of how the society works, how politics works, and things like that, I think is helpful. In terms of how to break the cycle, it's the question that I've grappled with and continue to grapple with because I'm not sure yet. And I think one of the points that was made is the fact that for the overwhelming most part, there hasn't necessarily been a black consensus in terms of 100% of the population agreeing on everything. And I think it's becoming more difficult now because of the era of colorblindness and formal equality that's being pushed, and the fact that racism is not as pronounced and as visible as it was. I'm going to say visible. Visible is the wrong word. Overt, as it was in the 1950s and the 1960s and before that. And so we're living in a time right now where the emphasis is on acting like racism doesn't impact things anymore. And there are a lot of black people, an increasing number of black people who act like racism doesn't impact things anymore. Number-wise, my understanding is that more black people have voted Republican this election cycle than in like decades. And so I think the fact that they voted Republican and picked this particular candidate who has been an obvious symbol of white supremacy is very fascinating because, again, I think goes to show the fact that a lot of black people want to act like racism does not exist anymore, that we've gone past it, ascribe to personal responsibility, politics, and the like. So I don't know how to reverse the trend. I have ideas in terms of, I think, in my imagination, I think that number one, there needs to be more of a return to grassroots politics. Number two, if we're going to vote, that we need to be strategic and intelligent in our voting. And when I say strategic and intelligent, I mean, number one, voting as some type of block, not necessarily getting all African Americans to do, because that's not going to happen. But also being wise about, again, how politics works. Voting doesn't control politics, money does. That's always been the situation. And if you're not funding your own candidates, then I don't see how you can then expect them to represent you. But these are just ideas, and like I said, as a practical thing, it's something that I struggle with all the time.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Very good.
I just feel like we're gonna get to a point where like everybody understands what's going on, but then it's like somehow they hit us with a downfall. Like I'm saying, like we could just stop that cycle of like getting hit with that downfall. I feel like so that it like eradicates that ignorance at least. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, I don't think that everybody needs to be wisened up and wake up in order for a movement to happen.
Like, because it happened in history before, so like.
But everybody was not awake when it happened. That's my point. Like when the civil rights movement happened, there were plenty of black clergy who wanted nothing to do with Dr. King, nothing to do with the civil rights movement or protest whatsoever. Many of the black so-called elites wanted nothing to do with Dr. King, nothing to do with the civil rights movement whatsoever. So I don't think there should ever be a point where we should wait for all of black people to get on the same page. That will never happen.
Not wait. I'm just saying like, how like we can, like I feel like there's like things that can go to work to like make that stick. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like we don't have to have that here in overseas. We don't gotta have like that kind of like disconnect. You don't have to have that. I feel like it can actually change. You know what I'm saying?
Thank you so much. This is good. I know the other persons, you have a question, and what's your question? Go ahead.
Yeah, kind of similar to what Brody was saying. So would you, and this is to any professor that would like to answer, I'm sorry for my voice, but would you guys think that there would be like a better impact if Kamala's campaign kind of invested in like black thinkers rather like black like popular figures? You know, not necessarily like Beyonce. I think, you know, that song was a hit, but like, you know, everybody else, I feel like maybe she didn't need to get, you know, because I feel like that's not as much of a long lasting impact, because I feel like black thinkers that would be pushing a cultural impact or just an educational impact, right, on black people. Right, I feel like, would you guys agree, or what's your thoughts on that?
So you're saying that Kamala or any elected official throughout the history of America,
like Kamala.
oh, Kamala in particular, she should have focused on the development of Africology and help to give funding to the Africology departments like these that helps to develop consciousness. Is that what you're saying?
In our face instead of entertainers in our face.
Well, when she went to the Breakfast Club, like that was her intellectual foray. And I'm being slightly tongue-in-cheek, but like really what this is so Harold Cruz wrote a book in the 70s called The Crisis of the Neo-Intellectual. And essentially what the upshot of the book was, like black intellectuals have essentially like given up on their task, which is really the task of the intellectual to me, is to what I try to do is, I feel especially privileged that as a tenure track professor, like I can spend hours writing and thinking and reading and delving into these texts. Most people are just trying to survive. They don't have time to do that. So I feel like it's part of my moral responsibility as an intellectual to convey that as clearly as I possibly can and as truthfully as I think I can. And Cruz critiqued that. He says essentially black people in the 60s, they got a slice of the capitalist pie and they say, you know what, I'm gonna take this foundation job. I'm gonna take this like lofty job in government. Like that was kind of the whole purpose of the book. Now, I don't really feel comfortable disparaging people for that, because I do believe that at most people's core, most people are gonna do what's best for themselves and their families, first and foremost. I think for the average American, I think this is me being, you know, somewhat kind of provocative, but I think for most Americans, I think freedom to them means having a job that allows them to be able to, like, you know, do hood rat stuff with their friends from time to time, maybe go on a trip here and there, like eat out occasionally. Yeah, it's like a very we live in a consumer society, so from birth we're socialized to believe that the mark of a good life is being able to consume in a consumer society, and that's part of the reason we have an empire. The whole point of having an empire is so that you can take resources from around the globe and make sure that the country that is doing the imperialism can provide things to their citizens.
I have a question. And
well, I'd like to respond to it.
So I was just going to say that I think Kamala did what she could, in the sense that where there aren't intellectuals that are stepping up to the plate in a way that I think they should be.
All right. You have a
But
question.
I think beyond that,
And then we'll get to you, okay?
I think people need to remember, and I think what this election reminded us, is that this is still a white supremacist nation, and America is still a red country. Like, even when you look at states in terms of, well, these state went blue, when you actually look at like county by county, the majority of the counties are red. And so when you talk about should she add more black intellectual thinkers, I'd love for her to do that, but the reality is if she does, how competitive is she going to be in this society where there is an increasing pressure to not talk about race and not talk about issues related to blackness? I mean, they're shutting down critical race theory. They're shutting down black studies departments.
Well, you're making a very, very important point, but can you slow down a bit, because this is good. We don't want to miss that. You said a very poignant and profound point. You have to slow down with it, brother. Say it slowly, please. Go in at it slowly. Yeah, man. Let me hear. Yes.
What I was saying was that it's still a white supremacist and red nation, red state, red country. And so we're living at a time right now where it is politically popular to shut down critical race theory, to shut down anti-racist teachings, to shut down diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. All of that is being shut down. And Kamala's trying to win over a mostly still white nation and white adjacent nation. So it's like, if that's the type of stuff that she's putting down, and these are things that are costing people elections. I mean, people who promote DEI this election have pretty much been kicked out. People who've been talking about promoting critical race theory have been losing elections. And so if she's trying to be competitive, bringing in more black intellectual thinkers is the last thing she's going to do. Generally speaking, the response from politicians in general elections when it comes to dealing with black people is to be critical. And I'm talking Democratic candidates, from Bill Clinton to Barack Obama to Joe Biden to Kamala Harris, is to be critical of black people. It's to talk about personal responsibility and pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps, the things that they don't say to anybody else, but they say it to us because it wins votes. And it comes across a certain way that is favorable to poor and working class white voters. So should she have done it? Morally speaking, yes. Practically speaking, if she's trying to win, she ain't gonna do that. No one is.
That's quite interesting. So you're talking about strategy then, but of course we talk about being an idealist as against a realist, okay? I mean,
so we should also remember that diversity is an ideological concept actually began on the right. That was originally a conservative idea that eventually got kind of bundled into the Democratic platform. When the idea of diversity, if you go and read like the Bakke decision that essentially created this notion of like diversity as what should be considered like affirmative action, that was a right-wing idea. So I think it's interesting that diversity has gone from a conservative right-wing idea into like a mainstream, like being adopted by the left. I think that's just something we should sit with.
That's good. Yes. And by the way, I just wanted to say real quickly, as it relates to Nixon in 1972, I interviewed a young man in Center City while he was doing his thing, and he said to me, "Oh, I'm not voting for Kamala because Nixon, in his meeting, said we're going to give African Americans this policy, and they are going to vote for us for 250 years."
Yeah,
is that true?
So I actually spent like 2 weeks in the Nixon archives this summer working on my book, and I think Nixon is such a fascinating political figure because we don't give him credit. He's actually a very skilled politician.
Yeah.
And part of the reason he embraced affirmative action was because he knew that it would be divisive. So he knew that if groups had to come to him and essentially compete against one another for resources, that it would essentially destroy the Democratic Party from the inside. So like he kind of preemptively kind of anticipated what was going to come. So I think that he should get credit for being a quite skilled politician in that regard. But I know that, Nixon understood that he knew that how politics works. You had to give people crumbs, you had to give people something to make them feel as though like you were legitimate. And his program was black capitalism and affirmative action and jobs programs. And he actually did increase investments in education in his first term. By his second term, he had gone fully racist. So he was like, not that. But like before that, he did actually increase investments in education.
Thank you so much. This gentleman is going to say, respond. You have a question? Go ahead. Yes, yes.
Yeah, like you said, there was also, you said there's like black people who are still voting for Trump. And there's people who are like you said, don't really know their stance politically. So my question is, what would you ask or what would you tell like a black person, to like make him or her like decide where they want to be or who's going to serve them better?
Oh, I tell a person. Oh gosh.
You want to repeat? Can you say it again? Please repeat.
So,
Yes.
So basically, what would you guys say or ask a person or tell them to like persuade them on like their political stance and who would like serve them better?
Okay.
I mean, I don't even know. That's a tough question. I'll just lead it off that way. And I guess this is kind of why it's a tough question. I taught today. I taught race and the law, and we talked about the election. And I talked to them about conversations that I've had with people and that I've had with students about voting.
Mm-hmm.
And I say, okay, so talking to students, what are the issues that impact you, that impact your family, that impact your community, that impact black people? And invariably they name a lot of things. They talk about homelessness, they talk about crime, they talk about mental health, they talk about drugs, they talk about housing and the issues that they have with housing and a bunch of stuff. And then I said, okay, now how does voting solve those problems? And it always goes silent. And so when you say, well, what would I say to a person for them to figure out who they should vote for? I think the first question is, why are you voting, period? And if you don't have a reason why you're doing it, then I think that's kind of the issue too. Or if you're doing it really because you got told to do it, then that's a problem. If you're voting, there should be a reason why you're doing it. And the reason may be because of, the fact that ancestors struggled for the right to vote, particularly in the South. You're voting because there's a particular candidate who has professed a particular issue that matters to you, and if that's it, then do that. And so in terms of picking who to vote for or whether to vote, I would start off with that. Like, what are the issues that are impacting you? What are the issues that are impacting your community? What are the issues that are impacting your people to the extent that you care? And if a candidate speaks to that, then that should be the candidate that gets your vote. And if there's a candidate that doesn't speak to that, then that candidate should not get your vote.
Thank you so much. I was going to ask, I'm happy you asked that, because I was going to ask the question to each of you. Maybe 5 of you could respond. What is it that you want? What is it that you want to happen in U.S. elections? What policy? What is it that you guys want? Anybody? 2 persons. Tell us what it is that you want, and then I'm going to ask which candidate provides that for you and why. Maybe you don't have to say the why part. I'm just interested, since we're talking about what people want. Yes, let's see what most of you want here. What is it that you want as African Americans here? Yes.
I just want I want us to be more educated on who we are, what we've done. I feel like we do a lot, and it's kind of washed away. So people think that we ain't do anything.
So Afrocentric education.
You said what?
So an Afrocentric education.
Yeah, I feel like it should be more it should be that truth should be probably spread out or distributed better. I feel I feel like it should be distributed way better, because it's like they almost plan it out so that we don't get that information. Now we thinking, okay, we don't even know what we did. Now it's easy for them to tell us okay, you gotta do this, you gotta do this. It's easy for them to make us not want to vote or care about the politics or whatever. Not saying that. I know you were saying you gotta really know why you voting, but because I can say for myself, I didn't do too much research on the candidates like that. I just know that we just need to be more informed. I feel like. You feel me?
So you're saying that education is important, and that's we need. Okay, fine. And you just said what it is, and I asked what it is that we want in order to.
I want people to be.
No, that's fine. But what I'm saying is that we talk about consciousness. Do people even know? How are we? What's our starting point? We talk about the need to develop a particular kind of consciousness because African Americans have been discredited, okay, and there have been policies to impoverish us. I was in DC and we talked about policy. The policy in terms of ensuring that certain houses remain at when you appraise certain houses. If African Americans come out of the house, then it appraised differently. And who are the appraisers? 99.9% of appraisers are Caucasian, and they view African American values and households a certain way, and they carry that. So part of the problem, we have too many Caucasians doing appraisals. We need to balance that out. Maybe that is something that we could. That is straight to policy, is it? And what affects policy? Elections.
So I would suggest one text. I signed this in my African American political thought class. It's called "What the Negro Wants." So it was a book that was written in 1944, I believe it was, by a political, I think he's a sociologist, Rayford Logan. And in the book, he talks to a host of different Black activists. So he talks to Mary McLeod Bethune, he talks to A. Philip Randolph, all different sorts of Black activists. And in that book, they're asked essentially the questions we're discussing now. So what is it that Black people want?
Yes.
They talk about housing. They talk about what that might look like. They talk about how do you organize an economy. They talk about the role of education in that. So I would highly recommend checking out that book. I think a lot of the points that you're making are kind of covered in there. And obviously it's 1944, so a lot of the things that they're considering may not necessarily be as timely, but thematically, I think that's something that we need to collectively do more of. It's kind of have that question. What does the Black person want?
Okay. All right, many questions. Let's go with this. Dr. Flannery. Dr. Flannery, I've never met you before. Hi, how are you? Yes, sorry about that. Dr. Flannery, go ahead.
Thank you so much. So, I've been listening to a lot of the free Black media, the podcasters, the Black media.
Yeah.
And I think we could be underestimating why Black people voted or didn't vote a certain way based off the grassroots conversation. But I do want to fact check really quick before I make my point, because I heard you say that there was this large number of Black people that voted Republican this election, and I believe that to be true, but when I checked the polls this morning, it said that Black people still 86% voted Kamala, which is almost the exact same who voted for Biden. So where is this large number of Black people who voted Republican?
No, I didn't say that there are a large number. I said the largest number since the 1930s of people who were going Republican. Black people still, in the main, vote Democrat. But there were more I'll double check the numbers, but from what I saw, there were more African Americans from a percentage that went Republican
but
than...
moved the number a 1%. I was disappointed in that. I say this because I don't think Black people as are uninformed as you were suggesting, that we're just voting because we don't know what's going on. I don't believe that. I also don't believe that Black people were voting this election only thinking about Trump and Kamala. What I have been listening to the last few months in terms of the free Black media, podcasters, whatever, is Black people were having, thousands of Black people having conversations that they were on code deciding we need to consciously let the Democrats crash and burn. They need to know that they can't take our vote for granted. There was thousands of people saying they were either going to vote for Trump or not vote at all on purpose. Not because they preferred Trump, Kamala, but because they wanted to debase the Democratic Party so that they could, in the next election, that both the Republicans and the Democrats would have to vie for their vote. And Black people have been talking about reparations constantly. So, but then I was disappointed when I looked, first I Kamala lost. The grassroots, they really did unplug the Democratic Party, but then I was like, it was still 86% Black people voted for the Democrats. So I don't know if the organizing of the grassroots to intentionally not support the Democrats is going to be meaningful in the next election if the numbers didn't move. But I don't think Black people just voted based off if they like Kamala or Trump or based off just being uninformed. I think we have been thinking about the next 20 years, 50 years, and what is it going to take to change the electoral process in relation to Black people as a group in this country, particularly in the conversation on reparations. Have you been hearing some of these conversations?
All right, hold on. A follow-up question to you. You said, but I know you talk about, both of you have been talking about the number of people that vote in terms of African Americans. What about white Americans? Do you find more people came out to vote? Because there's also the issue of demographic changes in the US, and I'm part of SRBI, and we did that study that looks at the demographic change in the US, which will begin, it was supposed to start in 2025, it will now start in 2045. That's a real fear. So do you think that people voted for Trump, or more white people, but I don't know the data. Any suggestion, any conversation?
Okay, well,
know about them. I'm just talking about the black vote first.
Yeah.
I think it is an important question.
Yes,
I
yes.
wonder if other people have heard these conversations where thousands of black people are like, we are not voting for Democrats so we can get the attention of the electoral process.
Oh, there are many people who want to speak. So what we're going to do is, hold on, we're going to have our, no, I know, give me a second, our panelists will respond. Then you will respond because you had your hand up. And then, and so you will respond. And then you're behind me. You're behind, so I can't see you. But it's going to be our panelists, you, sir, and you, sir. All right? Go ahead.
okay, so I appreciate everything that you said. I don't think that I gave the impression that black people were uninformed or voting uninformed. If I did, I certainly apologize, because that's not. Oh, okay, yeah. No, I think that.
I'm just saying, like, people, like, more education will, like, stop that, like, cycle that we in and stuff, you know what I'm saying?
I think, I think the conversation about black people voting is a very important conversation in terms of it being strategic. And so, I mean, I'll be fully frank. I'm one of those black people that did not vote for that very reason. And I think there needs to be a serious conversation about why more people, and black people in particular, are exempting themselves from participating in the electoral process. Because as I said at the outstart, we've been voting for 50 plus years, and the country has been headed the same exact way. And I think part of the problem has to do with the fact that the Democratic Party has expected the black vote, and they don't work for it at all. And so, and this is honestly part of the reason why, and I think it also speaks to what you said, where you do have African Americans voting for Trump. Now, is Trump going to help black people? No. But it's this idea that the Democratic Party has been expecting the black vote and not having to work for it at all. And I do think that African Americans need to be a lot more strategic with their vote in saying, you have to come up with policies for us. And if you do not come up with policies for us, we are not going to vote for you. We don't care. Because at the end of the day, I think largely the condition of African Americans has remained regardless of who has occupied the White House. And I think candidates need to be reminded of that. So I think that's an excellent point with regards to African Americans who decided not to vote or to vote for Harris. And I think that more black people really need to do that. And I think that there needs to be, just like the Democrats and the Republicans compete for every other demographic, they should be made to compete for black votes as well.
Thank you so much. Wow, this is great. Organization with intent. Who is next? Yes.
So one person was saying, I have two questions. Either can answer which one you feel best you want to answer. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with Dura Ben Wahab. He's like,
yeah.
So you guys are historians in Albert. So you guys already know, like, he was part of Panther 21, the split with PPP.
Wait, hold up. You're speaking so fast.
I got you.
Yes. And what's your name, sir?
Zach.
Zach, thank you. Go ahead.
So, the Black Panther Party splits. They form the BLA. Panther 21 happens where they accuse 21 former Black Panthers who are part of the BLA, Black Liberation Army, with, I believe, trying to bomb a particular building. So Ashanti Shakur gets sent to Cuba. A lot of different Panthers get bailed out, so on and so forth. But Dura Ben Wahab, still alive, still going, still building, organizing. He has a sort of way he feels that you can gain a sort of solution within this sort of like capitalist system that we live in. And he sort of defines it as a united front against fascism. So I'm gonna ask you guys, what are your sort of, have you ever heard the term? And also, what do you guys think about building united front against fascism? We do see that like terrorist aggression has been on an all-time high in the United States. We do see that police terror has been increasing year after year. 1,000 people die from police every year.
Very good question.
We see that, I think this year the number increased. There's a percentage of black people in it, but just in general. But black people again are also harassed by police at higher rates, so on and so forth. So we see that. So that's my sort of question in terms of what do you guys see in terms of merits of like a united front against fascism, and how do you think that would look like? Okay. And then there's the other question I may have. How do you see?
Wait, hold on. Can you hold that second one?
Yeah.
And then just so you know, we are. It's 6:40. I think we're supposed to finish at what, 7?
I'll stick with the first question.
Okay, so let's go, and we're gonna have. This is gonna be part 1. We have to have a part 2, Dr. Mazama. But who wants to take? You want to take it?
So essentially, your question is like, what is my thought on the notion of the United Front?
Yes.
So I would say United Front against fascism. I would say first, I think there's not a clear kind of agreement as to like what qualifies as fascism. So like we think about fascism as kind of a historical formation, kind of arising in Italy and part in Germany, kind of that European formation. Like it was a particular expression of capitalism after World War I that I think is in a lot of ways kind of historically bound. So like, what do we do with the capitalism now that pretty much doesn't care about borders anymore? That was kind of the point of globalization. So you can't run from it. Like it goes pretty much, it's everywhere now. Including the People's Republic of China, which still considers itself a socialist country. I mean, it's very much a clear kind of a moment of capitalism. So like, what are we uniting against? And so like, I'm not gonna say I'm against it, but I think going back to my original question is like, I do think there needs to be some of the politics really is in this question of like, what do we want? What are we fighting for? And I think that's often taken for granted because we use terms like freedom and equality and justice and things like that. But like, I think we need to be a little bit more actually a lot more tactical about what that means before we jump onto, like, to me, the United Front is a tactic. But like tactics aren't ends in themselves, like they are means to ends. And my question is, we don't know what the ends are. So like, what is the function of the tactic? Or what would the function of the tactic be? Just to stop Trump? Is that all that does? Like, I don't, yeah.
Or when he talked about white terrorist aggression, which is growing rapidly. So I guess for you, we have to challenge or mitigate that.
So fair. So the question
is similar. With a black sorry, I don't use the term black anymore. Unless I'm talking about the African American response. Is that what you're saying?
So then, okay, if that's the case, like let's say we want to stop the Proud Boys. Okay, how do we do that? Do we use them back? We give the state more power? The state that already has the power to surveil us day in and day out. So like, what is the?
I'm saying Garuba sort of understands it as he's seeing the current he's analyzing the sort of like conditions of them right now. And he sees a lot of sort of, as you guys talk about, a lot of black bourgeois politicians are in positions of power that they don't deserve us. And so he's seeing that because the Black Panther Party was the first party to have a united front against fascism, and they didn't do it just because of like, we just want to stop fascists from coming and then nothing afterwards.
Right.
They wanted to build something
strategic. Yeah.
So Garuba is following in that tradition of like, let's revive this because if we're one of the first black radical organizations to create in the United States, is there still merit? And he's basically basically says there's merits to like having it. But I'm asking you guys, do you think there's still merits to sort of bringing back that united front?
Yes, but the caveat being like, I think that's a tactic. And so like the question is like, to what ends? Like, what are we trying to accomplish? Are we trying to get democratic socialism? Are we just trying to stop the Proud Boys? Like what?
You say communism. You say You say black liberation.
Well, to me, even black liberation is still not precise enough, especially under global capitalism, where that can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And I don't think we have, kind of to his point, like we do lack the historical knowledge to really like pinpoint what that is. So I do think that there does need to be this kind of like historical knowledge building so people can have some sense of, especially if you want to think of it as being a black freedom struggle, something that is over the long array. You have to have some sense of what people in the past were fighting for to know if it's something that can be picked up or something that needs to be reconsidered, something that needs to be reevaluated. So it's kind of hard to just answer that question kind of abstractly without some clear sense of like what the goals are.
Right, and you use the word united. How united can we be within the political divide? Think about that. Yes.
This is back to your earlier question when you asked what do people want from movement.
Yes.
I think that's pretty simple. It's reparations. I think everything else is just attempting like a nuance of something that's pretty simple. The whole point of, I guess, the scare tactic that black people, like we were talking about the police and all that, we've been going through that. Like, you can't go that over my head. If you scared, get a gun. I think it was Ida B. Wells that said on the door front that every black revolution is a gun or something like that. Yeah. And then you spoke about freedom and that it looks different. Particularly in America, I guess you ask, I think what freedom is simple. I think how you get freedom is different. Like in Haiti, for the revolution, I think that was pretty simple. Like, we're enslaved, we don't want to be enslaved. And slavery was something economic. So I think how you, like the conditions imposed on people, black people, was something economic, among other things. But I think the first thing is economic. the guy that was saying earlier was talking about education. While we do get reparations, we can have our own self-determination and do what we want. And like he said too, black people aren't a monolith. So I think at the core of what black people going through is something economically. And a last point too, from 1964 to 1992, black politicians rose from 108 to 8,000, but the condition of black people actually got worse. So I think again, economics, so that we could have our own self-determination is at the key, and that's reparation. That's why I didn't believe it. And I think until black people get something specific that's not BS talk, then they'll get the black vote.
I have a question as you get to wrap up that I was supposed to ask, and this I would love to. I don't know if we have time to invoke Professor Jason Hill from DePaul University, who is against reparation. I don't know if I have time for that. That one is so deep. We don't have time for that. It's deep. But I have. It's deep. But I have a question. I said, how effective have policies like the Voting Rights Act, affirmative action, DEI initiatives, Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act, in addressing economic and social disparities of African Americans? Just so you know, there are those who look to economics, but there are those who look to the spirituality, African spirituality, decolonization of, and of course Bob Marley said, I look to the I, okay, and then created his own religion. Okay, so that's an interesting question. Any response to the gentleman, sir, Professor? And sorry.
Is this for them? The question is for them, or is this
anyone?
Okay,
go ahead.
To the DEI.
Yes.
I think I witnessed this after George Floyd. George Floyd is where I'm from, in Texas, in 3rd Ward. So
good.
This idea of DEI was also a form of white accommodationism, especially around the time when people started compiling anti-racism resources for white people to better understand the conditions of black people that they had long since ignored. And so these ideas or these concessions or these illusions of, well, we've got to work better to understand each other, we got to work better to truly look at ourselves as human beings and different things. And one thing, the casualty of that is that somehow when we're talking about African people or displaced African people, somehow we're no longer talking about humanity. Or when blackness as a concept is brought forth or put forth, then we're no longer talking about humanity. And I think a casualty in DEI is something that was actually beneficial to white people. And one thing I noticed as a graduate and alumnus of the University of Texas at Austin is that a lot of those programs went beyond giving people information about how black people were experiencing the political landscape of Austin, which is majority white, and the black student population hadn't risen above 3% since they allowed black students to be admitted into the university, that a lot of the cultural initiatives there went beyond giving information to white people, and those were only felt by the students. And what I mean by that is that there were initiatives put in place for us to understand each other and to get to know each other. So you had international students from the continent being in conversation with students who have grown up here. And so, but also the casualty is that that is what DEI was read as. DEI was read as giving people information about how they think black people live, and that's the end of it. And that's where it stopped. And my question around like black existence and African existence, or the displacement of African existence here in the United States, is that if we are to truly become into solidarity with these people, because there has been a history of white solidarity with African people. However, I feel like white people do not live in a space of they think they know and that's it. And my issue or my stance right now is to not get white people on my side. I actually think we should do away with that ideology. But I say all of this to say is that we collectively cannot continue to operate from a place of it's not that deep. Like what the brother is saying here with the Black Panther Party. The Black Panther Party has been written off as misogynistic, patriarchal, and that's why their ideas, Huey P. Newton's idea of intercommunalism has not been engaged, because we've already written off these intellectuals historically. And so even with DEI
5 seconds.
You got it. DEI initiatives, those ideologies have been written off for their methods. So to point to your point, I actually do think armed revolution is a step in the right direction. Free Assad Shakur.
Wait, hold in the U.S.?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay. So we're talking. So you make a differentiation between revolutionary change as against linear change. What does change look like within the context of the U.S.? Within the context of a people? What does it look like? I mean, we don't have much time, but I want my panelists to wrap up the debate today. And if you want to respond to him, go ahead.
So I don't know if you were here when I was mentioned this earlier, but I mentioned that diversity is an ideology, is itself a conservative, has a conservative origin. So if you read the Bakke decision, essentially what the Supreme Court says was like diversity is good for America because it essentially helps people to learn to be multicultural and learn how to engage with people in a market economy, et cetera, et cetera. So like it's always had a conservative origin. It later got co-opted as multiculturalism in the 90s and then as diversity really around Obama. So that has a historical through line. So your question is, what was your question again? To kind of wrap up. Oh,
yeah, it was about change.
And yes, and all the other policies that have yes. Like the voting right, affirmative, and so on and so forth.
So I actually think if we take the Voting Rights Act, so I think we sometimes dehistoricize or take the context of these acts out. I mean, the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act explicitly were not meant to do anything about economic justice, which is why King and Bide Rustin, and say what you want about all these figures, you can disagree with them, but like they were all adamant that focusing or bifurcating these two things in this way was only going to harm black people because they knew that if you didn't get it all at once, it probably wasn't going to happen. So like there was an understanding pretty early on that Voting Rights Act and civil rights weren't going to address economic. It was attempting to do a very specific thing, which was integrate black people into liberal capitalism. Right. Now, do we think that that's what we should want as a collective? So, I mean, I can't say yes or no. Everybody has to decide for themselves if being incorporated into a liberal capitalist imperialist order is.
But that's the problem. What you just said creates a problem too. You said everyone has to decide for themselves.
Yeah, but
then when they do decide, it creates. I mean, if everybody gets to decide for themselves, then we're gonna have a divide. It's gonna be a splinter of people all over the place. And you're talking about a united front.
Here's the thing, like. You can get consensus one of two ways. You can impose it or you can create it. Mm-hmm. I tend to think creating it, which would require disagreement, which requires listening to different perspectives and trying to forge something is much more, in the long term, much more efficacious than it being imposed from above. Especially in a country that claims that we live in a free society. Yeah. Imposition is not going to do that. So
thank you so much. And of course, Dr. Zamir, in response to the gentleman and all these ideas about DEI. Actually, you did respond in a sense, but any final response?
I mean, I think I want to echo my co-panelist when he said that the concept of diversity is a right-wing concept, and that the Justice Lewis Powell, who wrote the decision in Bakke, was very much concerned about setting the United States apart from the USSR. And so he said that in the United States, we believe in diversity. In the USSR, they don't. So certainly not out of any desire to help black people. In fact, in many respects, the diversity rationale was to enrich the education experience of white people by having black folks in the class. And I think diversity now, in many respects, has become a hustle. There's a whole industry behind it. And of course, once you put industry behind it, then they're not actually interested in eradicating the problem because then industry dies with it. I think one of the biggest problems with conversations about race in diversity circles, outside of diversity circles, is that there's no discussion of history. And so if you're not talking about history, then it's very, very easy for the United States Supreme Court to write a narrative of racism that includes anti-white racism. It's very easy for the United States Supreme Court to write, and not just the court, but everybody, to write narratives that completely deny the impact of slavery, the impact of Jim Crow, the impact of the violence of the times. And so, I mean, even when I listen to, I forget who said it, talking about white supremacy being, or white terrorism being at an all-time high. It really isn't. Like when you look at 1880 to 1940, a black person is being lynched once every 4 days between 1889 and 1929. 2 to 3 times a week between 1890 and 1917. And they were public spectacles. They were announced in newspapers. They were planned in advance. They took pictures and photographs and sent postcards to each other showing black people being lynched and tortured and murdered and burnt and all of that stuff. So it hasn't...
MAGA.
So it hasn't ended, I guess, is my point. And so what does change look like? I don't know. It would be lovely. It would be lovely to live in a world where social hierarchies do not exist.
Yes, yes.
We're nowhere near close to that. But as far as the question regarding the United Black Front, I'm for any group of people that are genuinely trying to find a way to deal with the problems that we're dealing with. And the fact is, I don't agree with every solution that's out there, but I don't know everything and I don't know the answer. So if you're trying in some way, shape, or form, then I respect that. And I think I'll wrap up there.
Wow, this is powerful. There's so many questions. I mean, I have much more to ask. There's a lot about, talk about Haiti. Don't get me started on Haiti. Haiti is clamoring for a Haitian-led solution. Where is the support? Where are the other African Americans all over the world helping them, clamoring for that support? We have a petition. Okay, if you're interested, please call me and talk to me. All right. But this was great. Thank you guys so much. Oh, yeah, man. I think we have to continue the conversations. Hopefully we can have more conversations like this, please. We really want to have more conversations. And we're not done because Dr. Mazama, who is the chair of the Africology African American Department, will come and do the vote of thanks and the appreciation and so on. And I just want to say thank you for inviting me to moderate. It was an amazing opportunity. Thank you. Yes.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. You are amazing.
Oh no, I'm just like.
Thank you very much. I want to tell you we'll be back here next Wednesday at 3.
The hypocrisy of African Americans who say they didn't vote. Again, the title of this short blog, which is really a reaction to the, which is a post-election forum, which is a post-election, which is a reaction to the elections, or a post-election reaction. And it's a reaction to a reaction from a forum that was held at the Temple University Africology Department yesterday, looking at the impact that U.S. elections have had on the African American community in the U.S. And I moderated the event yesterday. It's available on the YouTube channel only right now. Just 48 minutes of it. It was for about 2 hours. The part of it is also on the full episode will be available in audio. The full show will be available in audio either tonight or tomorrow. We'll play the full audio, but a bit of it is available. But my reaction or my comments based on what I am hearing from various people after the election and even from the forum I attended and moderated yesterday, it led me to conclude or to do this short blog entitled The Hypocrisy of African Americans Who Say They Didn't Vote. And it's available in the Neoliberal blogs at renaldocmckenzie.blogspot.com. And this is you can go to the neoliberal.com and go to the Renaldo, the Neoliberal blogs, and it should come up. But I wrote in my blog earlier that there is something I can't get out of my mind since yesterday at the post-elections forum held at Temple University's Africology and African American Studies Department. How can an African American professor sit here in his ivory tower and say they didn't vote because African Americans have been voting for 50 years without any progress? When sitting here as a professor came from the efforts of people like Octavius V. Cato, who was killed on October 10, 1871, trying to get Africans involved or African Americans involved in the electoral process. In American political democracy, nothing happens without the electoral process. But that's one step, and the fight is multifaceted. Some are using politics, others academics, while others entrepreneurial initiatives and economics, etc. It is as if all the work to get us involved was in vain, when our ability to get things done required real actions, or requires real actions still happening And voting is part of that process. It's hypocrisy or hypocritical, to say the least. One other professor said that it is fatalistic. We are going to share the election forum with you. Please watch you can watch an excerpt of it in video, which is 4 to 8 minutes, and you can watch the full episode available later this evening on the Neoliberal Round podcast, and it will also be fed. It will be RSS fed into our YouTube channel, so it's available there. So go to any podcast stream, iTunes, Spotify for podcasters, Amazon Music, and any stream all over the world, and we will have that available later this evening. But you can also go to YouTube, and we are also there. I'm Renaldo McKenzie, the creator and host of the Neoliberal Realm podcast. Please support us by going to anchor.fm/theneoliberal/support and visit us at theneoliberal.com and renaldocmckenzie.com. Get a copy of my book, Neoliberalism, Globalization, Income Inequality, Poverty, and Resistance. What good?